My community. You would think that's very easy to define, but it isn't, because it's something very personal. It's a place where one chooses to live, where one may choose to work. It's a place where you feel safe. It's a place that enhances your life in many ways, where you recreate, where you learn. Your children go to school, your children grow up. Many times it determines the type of individuals your children will grow up to be. It's my community. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My mom had 6 sisters and 1 brother. I lived in a 3-family house. My grandmother was on the 1st floor. I had an aunt and her family on the 2nd floor, and we were on the 3rd floor. In high school, I was in a Catholic school, and one of the nuns worked with me on public speaking, and I competed in Brooklyn. I could remember our first visit. I was taken to the Linwood property overlooking the river. That was my first introduction to Rhinebeck, and I fell in love with that incredible view of the Hudson River. When you looked at Rhinebeck, it was a small, sleepy, quiet little village. And I remember the first community effort in looking at, the streets. We have, 4 streets in the village that are the makeup of the commercial area. And I remember the owner of the Beekman Arms and the president of the First National Bank getting together and creating what was called the Visual Environmental Committee, and planted the first street trees, the wonderful trees that we now see in the village. That was the first effort that really spoke to the people. And the message was that as a community, we could work towards creating our destiny, that we had an opportunity to control how things would be in the future. It was a challenging time, and it took a long time to convince the community that we really had an obligation to protect and preserve what was unique and special to Rhinebeck for future generations to enjoy. We had a developer by the name of Victor Weingarten that came into Rhinebeck, he and his partner, and behind closed doors, they were proposing 20,000 residential units. It was a time when HUD had federal funds available to create new towns. And Victor Weingarten was a consultant for HUD and very much in tune with the dollars that were available and the concept of planned development districts or planned unit developments. And so he had purchased 1,600 acres in Rhinebeck. This land was the former property of the Astors. And he met with several of the local leaders in the community, and they convinced them that 20,000 units would not be anything viable in Rhinebeck. Part of that was hotel and heliport and major commercial area and mixed uses of residential uses. We were very fortunate that the economy took a nosedive, and Victor Weingarten left the community for several years. However, I have to say he did return to Rhinebeck and created a wonderful neighborhood called the Woods, and followed that with the gardens. And these 2 proposals, certainly a lot more appropriate for our community, have served the community well. Well, I look back to the very beginning of my involvement on sitting on county-wide boards. And I'd sit around the table and I would be the only woman sitting there. And, you know, whether it was the president of Central Hudson and the execs from IBM and presidents of the banks and everyone, you know, it was all male, and I was the one female. And gradually over time, there would be another female, and then another female, and it never became equal, but there was a significant change, and indeed, we've made great contributions, and we continue to do that. Well, I worked as chairman of the planning board for over 20 years. And with that, it's interpreting the zoning law, helping to recommend new zoning laws to the elected officials, creating, one of the unique things about Rhinebeck are the incredible resources that we have. We have hundreds of homes that are on the National Register. We have this wonderful scenic district and coastal zone, and none of this existed 30, 40 years ago. I just happened to fall into a job with a state senator. It wasn't anything I was looking for. He was a good friend and said, yeah, he had just gotten the seat. He went from the Assembly to the Senate and said, I need help. I need you to be with me. Give me 1 year. And I said, I don't want to go to work. I says, I'm very happy doing the things I do in the community. He says, but I need you. I says, okay, I'll give you 1 year. And it was 22 years later that his career ended, and I was happy not to have a job any longer. My responsibility for the senator was to meet with constituents in the community. I'd have an opportunity to meet with a group of people that had problems or issues and needed assistance, needed some guidance, and that was what I enjoyed. And I would report to the senator on a regular basis, and we would discuss how things would be addressed. And so it was work I enjoyed doing, and it pretty much fit into the type of work I did in the community. The Winnicke Land Trust at the very beginning was called the Hudson River Shorelands Task Force, and it was the result of major proposals coming into the community. We had a co-port that was being proposed across the river, directly across from the Astor property in one of the brickyards. And they were going to have these conveyor belts with coal going down into these ships, and it, you know, just would have been a horror story. And it was in the view shed of Rhinebeck and all the historic properties along the Hudson River. And there were several of these proposals that were not necessarily just local, but had regional implications. A group of us thought, you know, how do we deal with this? How do we cope with this? And we decided to create two organizations. One was the Hudson River Shorelands Task Force, thinking that we would focus on the lands along the shores of the Hudson River. The communities we, again, would focus on would be Hyde Park, Rhinebeck, Red Hook, Tivoli, Milan, and Clinton. And then actually recognizing that the historic resources had to be protected, and Hudson River Heritage then was sort of this nonprofit that was created. And their purpose was really to identify the historic structures and to make them eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. We had one of the professors from Bard College came up with this name of Winnicke was the name of an Indian tribe that roamed the lands of the Hudson Valley. And the word Winnicke means good land. Rhinebeck being a riverfront community, the sad thing was that we had no public access to the Hudson River. There was this historic dock that existed at one time where ferry service boats traveled from the east side to the west side, back and forth across the Hudson. But the site of this dock at high tide was 3 feet underwater. And again, understanding that, looking at the resources that we had in the community, we recognized that public access to the river was important. And a group of us formed a committee, and at that time the town board opposed what we were doing. And I remember writing a grant. I learned a lot in terms of dealing with federal and state agencies, and it was very complicated. It was very different then than it is today. I remember the day the committee decided we wanted a riverfront festival on this dock, and that it had to be at low tide. And we didn't realize how many people would come to this festival. And we had over 5,000 people. We had to call the high school principal and you say, yeah, how do we get some school buses here? We have to get people back and forth. And the buses arrived and people kept going back and forth. And people would come back down to the dock so amazed at what was happening and all these people and all these vendors, and it was a great big celebration. It was wonderful to see that a group of people who knew nothing about how to get a project like this done, we were able to be successful. And now it's wonderful to see that a whole new generation has picked that up and is doing wonderful things in Rhinecliff at the dock. The town park, which I call it the town park, I have trouble dealing with the name, but the Rhinebeck Town Park, there was a proposal for over 300 residential units on that property. And of course, that piece of property of 77 acres was adjacent to the 12 acres that the Star Library and the town pool were located on. A group of us realized that the development of that property would lose any opportunity for the future growth and expansion of the town park, that it really would limit opportunities with what existed at that time. I worked with the owners of that property as the leadership in the town changed. And I went to the new town supervisor. I would be willing to make an effort to see what we could do to reduce the price of the property. And he said he would be willing to consider that. The way the land was purchased was that I went to Dutchess County and asked them if they would consider their open space bond money to help with the purchase of the property. And they says, we protect farmland. That's what the source of this money is used for. And I says, this is a town park. It was farmed for many years. What if we put a conservation easement on it and designate a portion that could be used for farming in the future, and tried to build a case to get money from the county. I went to Thomas Thompson Trust and asked for funding from them, and they were very generous to us. The county commitment was that with that the town and the village had to put in a certain percent of the money, and they did. And so it's been a great project. There's so much more that has to happen there. Our pool is over 30 years old. Tennis courts, everything needs work there. So there's a lot that has to be done in the future. Well, Walkway over the Hudson is just an amazing, iconic recreational asset to Dutchess County, and certainly plays a role in international recreational opportunities. So I agreed to work with the board. I became president of the Walkway. I was there for 6 years. I was putting in 30 hours a week as a volunteer and decided I had fulfilled what my goal was, to make it a viable, strong organization that had the responsibility of growing and maintaining an iconic asset. Well, the Rhinebeck Performing Arts Center is a tremendous asset to the community. People of all ages are able to enjoy the experience of getting involved with the arts. And whether it's the management piece of it, whether it's the lighting, whether it's working on sets or performing on the stage. And Andy Weintraub, over a number of years, asked if I would get involved, and I was just so involved with so many projects, I felt I couldn't do it. Finally, they wore me down, and I joined the board and told them I would chair the capital campaign, and got the state and the county and the charitable trust all to contribute to the construction of the building you see there today. And I served on the board for a number of years and chaired finance committee, and you know, it was a great experience. I learned a lot about the arts with that involvement, and that's the story I tell, that as a volunteer, it's your opportunity to grow as an individual, and it's a wonderful experience. It march through life learning all these things that you'd never be exposed to. I strongly believe that volunteerism is the heart of the community. It's people coming together for a common cause, working together, sacrificing a lot of family time many times, being challenged by other individuals, sometimes within your family, your friends, your neighbors. You know, volunteerism is enriches your life. You grow as an individual. You have to put politics aside. You do have to be willing to listen. You have to be flexible. Compromise is important. If you don't compromise, you may end up with nothing. And many times you find with a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, good, healthy debate, that you end up getting something a lot better than initially you thought was going to be absolutely perfect. Yeah, my children want me to stop what I'm doing. My husband wants me to stop what I'm doing. And I've made it very clear, this is my life, and this is the way it has to be in order for me to exist. And yeah, that's what I want my children to remember. I just pray God there are others in the future that will continue to protect and preserve this very, very special community called Rhinebeck. I don't even remember half the organizations I've been involved with.